And so basically what was going on is I was starting to bullfrog. You know, you can see just a little bit of it, which is natural, right in here. But it was getting big on both sides. So I was kind of at my wit's end, and then I remember that I had seen Michael Brecker, that he was dealing with this, right? And his was super pronounced. So I called up the New York Musicians Union, asked for his address, and I wrote him a letter. And this would have been 1991. And maybe about a month later, I get a phone call, and the person asked for me on the end of the line. And I said, yeah, it's him. And he says, hey, this is Michael Brecker. And I'm thinking, of course it is. Which friend of mine is this, right? You know, because we used to do, you know, glove his hands, Miles, I want you in my band, you know, stuff like that. And we were just laughing. And then he said, I got your letter, and I wanted to see how you were doing. I hadn't told anybody I had sent a letter, so I knew it was him. My concern with my students, first and foremost, is for them as people, for their mental health, for their physical well-being. And so when they come into class, or if I've got a small group or whatever, I'm always checking in with them. You know, how are you guys doing? You know, how's the semester going? And, you know, I've been doing this long enough. I've done well over 325 clinics, and I've been at Vanderbilt now for 9.5 years. I've been around students enough that I can read them pretty quickly. Body language, eyes, physicality of it, the whole thing. So I'm always checking in with them, and I'm always stressing the importance of taking care of themselves. You know, pain exists for a reason.
Absolutely, yeah.
And if you're not listening to it, it will intensify until you do. So my suggestion is listen to it. Don't be scared of it, you know, or be scared of it, but don't be scared to, don't be inactive on it. Yeah. And advocate for yourself. Ask a lot of questions.
All right, welcome back, everybody, to Trust the Process. I'm so excited for our show today. I met this man a couple of weeks ago at the Jazz Education Network conference. He is very well known for his time with the Bela Fleck and the Flecktones, as well as the Dave Matthews Band. He's also a prolific educator and has come to my neck of the woods in Utah many times to work with different bands. I'm really excited to talk to him today. And Jeff Coffin, thank you so much for being here today.
Hey, Clark, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, we're going to get into a lot of really good things today. And I just, you know, when I do these episodes, I kind of just have my guests just kind of share their experience with their injury and kind of share that story. And then we kind of go from there. And so I believe I heard on a previous interview that you had done that you had, and from mutual friend or from friends that I have that have talked to you, that you had injured your neck a little while ago. And so what was that like? Kind of just go into that for us.
Yeah, it was right after I got out of college, and I was on a cruise ship, and I was on the ship for about 2.5 months. This was before I moved to Nashville, and I was asked to play alto on the gig, which I didn't own an alto. I hadn't really played alto since like 5th grade, and didn't really have the right equipment for it, et cetera, et cetera. I was also playing clarinet on the gig. And just had a very resistant setup on the mouthpiece, meaning that there was a lot of back pressure. And I see a trumpet hanging on the wall there, so you of all people would understand back pressure. And so basically,
yes,
there's a force that's behind that's resisting the mouthpiece, that's resisting the pressure you're putting in. So for me, what was happening is that I was starting to push from the neck, and there are these two bands of muscles that come around the neck this way that kind of hold everything in, the pharyngeus and laryngeal. And so basically what was going on is I was starting to bullfrog. You know, like you can see just a little bit of it, which is natural.
Right
in here. But it was getting big on both sides. And I had also worked on my tenor mouthpiece a little bit while I was on the ship, which was really dumb. And my reeds were too hard. And there wasn't really a way to get reeds because I was on a ship for 2.5 months.
Sure.
And so it was kind of, you know, it was kind of the perfect storm, if you will, which is not what you want on a ship, by the way.
Right.
And so
musically or weather-wise.
Musically,
right?
or weather-wise, right? And so it started to be the situation where I was leaking air out of my nose. I would feel pain when I was playing. I would have to stop, and I didn't know what was going on. I had never experienced anything like that before, and so after I got to Nashville, it still wasn't better. I'd be doing gigs, and I'd be doing loud gigs, and it was still doing it, and like friends would come to the gig and be like, "Man, you know what's going on with your neck?" I was like, "Man, I have no idea. I don't know what to do." There wasn't any place in town where I could try other mouthpieces. I went to doctors. I went to the head ENT guy at Vanderbilt. They did the endoscope down the throat to make sure there was nothing going on, damage-wise internally. I played for him also, talked about the back pressure, et cetera, et cetera. There was no place to try other mouthpieces to see if it made a difference. So I was kind of at my wit's end. And then I remember that I had seen Michael Brecker, that he was dealing with this, right? And his was super pronounced. So I called up the New York Musicians Union, asked for his address, and I wrote him a letter. And this would have been 1991. And maybe about a month later, I get a phone call, and the person asked for me on the end of the line. And I said, "Yeah, it's him." And he says, "Hey, this is Michael Brecker." And I'm thinking, of course it is. Which friend of mine is this, right?
Right.
Because we used to do, "Call up and say, hey, it's Miles, I want you in my band," stuff like that. And we would just laugh. And then he said, "I got your letter, and I wanted to see how you were doing." I hadn't told anybody I had sent a letter, so I knew it was him. And the profundity for me of Michael Brecker calling me, I had just gotten out of college. We had never met. I had no accolades to stand on whatsoever. He just did this because someone reached out, and that's the kind of person that he was. So we talked for a while. We talked for 20 or 25 minutes about what was going on, the kind of gigs that I was doing, what my setup was, what my reed strength was, sound, all this stuff dealing with kind of fundamental tone production. And he said, "I've been dealing with this for years." He said, "I was actually born with a hole in one of my muscles." And he said, "I ended up having an operation that didn't help." And so his was really blowing wide open. So he had to go to a mouthpiece that basically had no resistance. So he used to play an Autolink, which for saxophone players, we understand that that's got a pretty fair amount of resistance to it. He ended up going to a Dukoff, which has a baffle in the mouthpiece, which brings the top of the mouthpiece internally down slightly to kind of push that air through. Excuse me. And which gives you much less resistance in the mouthpiece itself. I think he also went to softer reeds, which lowers the resistance. And then eventually a guy named Dave Gardalla started making mouthpieces for him, which is what I believe he played on for the rest of his career until his very untimely passing, which I think has been 15 years a couple of days ago, actually. It's crazy. Yeah. He and Alice Coltrane passed the same week, That was a
Oh,
rough
man.
week. Yeah. So he had been going, I think, to John Hopkins. He said, I have a bunch of literature I'm going to send to you. And, this was during the days of photocopying. So he had to go and like get stuff photocopied, put it in the mail and send it to me, which he did. And he said the doctors are calling this repetitive stress syndrome. He said it's not a term that is widely known at this point. He said, but it's about to be. And once again, Mike Brecker on the cutting edge of things. Again, like if you said repetitive stress syndrome to somebody in the 1990s, they'd have no idea what you were talking about. And but this was something that was being manifested from playing a certain way. And so when I would lean my head back, you would see ridges on my neck. I guess the chord's on that side. You would see ridges of muscle on my neck here. And when I would poke it, it wouldn't be supple. It would be like hitting a table. It was so I was pushing from here. So the place the back pressure was going was here in the weakest part. So he recommended that I try some other mouthpieces. So I ordered some other mouthpieces, ones that had a baffle that cut way back on the resistance. And I think before they got there, I had seen a video. It might be Return of the Brecker Brothers, where he and Randy are. It's a live thing, and what I noticed is that Michael had a wrap around his neck. So he had given me his number, and he said, if you have any questions, call me. He said this really isn't something that's well known at this point. He said, but I know a lot about it and I'll help you any way I can. So after I saw this video, this was 2 or 3 weeks later, I called him back and I said, hey, I don't know if you remember, we had this phone conversation, blah, blah, blah. He says, yeah, of course. He says, how are things? What's up? How can I help you? And I mentioned that I had seen this documentary, this video, whatever exactly it was. And I said, I noticed you were wearing a wrap. And he said, it's an ACE wrap. It's an ACE bandage. He says, I'm wearing it to keep things from blowing open and also to kind of keep things warm. So like when you have an ankle injury or a knee or an elbow injury, you wrap it and that helps to keep it warm, so on and so forth. So I got the mouthpieces, changed reed sizes, started wearing this ACE wrap literally every time I would play. But the more important thing is that I went back to fundamentals also. I went back to sitting in a chair and thinking about my breath and my support. I went back to very basic long tones and thinking about where my center was that I was supporting from. And was I supporting from there? How was I breathing? Was I shallow breathing from the upper chest, or was I opening up here, loosening these muscles and flexing the abdomen as I breathe in, and then supporting it from there as I'm breathing out? So one of the reasons that when I teach, I'm a big proponent of the fundamentals is that I went back to them after I already knew how to play. After I'd been practicing 8 to 12 hours a day for years, and so to go back to that, to be in a position where I was in danger of not being able to play was daunting because there was no plan B, and so I did this and I wore this wrap, like I said, every time I played for a year. And I made a methodical study of not only my body position, but my breathing, where I was breathing from, how I was breathing, supporting, what I was doing with my neck, whether I was closing off, whether I was staying open, etc. And, I was doing society gigs. I was in a tuxedo with an ACE bandage around my neck.
Nice.
It was awful.
Very fashionable.
Very fashionable, yeah. And it was hot. It was uncomfortable. I hated it, but I did it. And at the end of that year, it was about a year, a little over a year, I was so frustrated with it that I had come to a point where I decided either it's healed or I'm done. Because I couldn't do that anymore. It was too uncomfortable, and it was just awful playing like that. Now, in the midst of this also, there were some trumpet players in Nashville that knew I was dealing with this. Mike Haynes in particular, and then eventually Steve Patrick. And
Wow.
And they said, "Hey, man, can we get that literature? Because we're dealing with that too." And I think to this day, they both may still wear a wrap when they're in the studio, especially playing lead. And but they were for a while anyway. I'm not sure if they still are, but I think they still may be. And so this one episode with Brecker certainly, without question, to me, saved my career. Absolutely saved my career. And I've recounted this story to his widow also. And and I was able to thank him in person because years later, when I was with the Flecktones, we met a couple of times, and again, there's no question in my mind that he saved my career, and he probably peripherally saved Mike and Steve's also, and I've talked with this about numerous people, so it's likely that ripple pushes even further out than that. But, knock on wood, I haven't had any issues since. And, whatever, it would feel like it was tearing, especially when I would play clarinet.
I can believe it with clarinet.
I'd be leaking air, like I said, through the nose, and it would just an awful, awful feeling. And, so yeah, it's been clear since then. Thank the gods, man.
Seriously.
And I play pretty hard, and so I've been very fortunate. Been very fortunate. And again, that he reached out to an absolute unknown, and I was just another saxophone player in the world. I mean, how many of us are there? There's so many, that he took that time. Oh, and on the second phone call we were talking, and this is during call waiting, like it would beep, and he said, "Hang on a second." And he says, "Let me grab this other guy." He comes back. He said, and I couldn't believe this at the time. He said it was Herbie. I told him I'd call him back.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm just thinking, oh my God, man, he just blew off Herbie Hancock to finish this conversation. Yeah, it was Herbie. I told him I'd call him back.
That's so good. Shows his character too at that point,
Well, that was the thing, man. I've had some experiences when I was young with a couple of legends that, really affected and informed the way that I do things even to this day. One of them was Bob Mintzer when I was at Disney in the late 80s for their summer program. He was one of the clinicians, and he came in and he gave a clinic and worked with us. And I would take a lesson with whoever I could of our guests. And he was so gracious, man, so kind, and so giving of his time. I still have the cassette tape of it, actually. And Bob and I have become very good friends over the years. And, and that influences how I deal with students. Because he didn't have to do that. He didn't have to take that time. Mike Brecker didn't have to take that time either. But here are the people that, I respected so much and was influenced by their music and by their spirit in particular. And here they are taking time to share their knowledge. And it was, honestly, it was profound. It's still profound to me to this day that those things happened. And there are other instances, of course, still, Well,
and that's just the thing that I think that I tell my audience the most is that you need to get a community behind you while you're going through injury recovery, because I can't imagine going through what I've had to go through and hearing what other people have had to go through as musicians going through that. I can't imagine doing that alone. And then part of my reason for doing this show is to show that, first of all, that there is still hope for your career, from that sense, but also that there's a community out there that hasn't really been brought to light of professional musicians, of working musicians, who have gone through it and overcome it. Right. But without those mentors in their lives coming through it, it's just that much more difficult to try. And it's not saying it can't be done, but because it has been done by some people, but
absolutely. And at the same time, you still have to, you still have to produce a product. Like if you're being hired for a gig, you still have to go out and be able to do that gig.
Absolutely.
And so, you have to have a consistency within all that. So I was playing through all that time, and it was very challenging. When I started playing a lot of soprano, I would find that, sorry, where's the camera? So this part of my forearm, the underneath part of the forearm, because I was holding the horn all the time. So the underneath part of the forearm, it was getting really exaggerated muscularly, like this part here.
Interesting.
Almost kind of like looked like Popeye or something, And this under part here, you can see just a little bit of it. These muscles, and so it was because I was holding the soprano when I wasn't playing, and I would get these shooting pains in my arm, and so I started wearing a neck strap. But I wouldn't make it, like I wanted to have the flexibility on soprano. So when I wear a neck strap on soprano, it's never tight. I don't, like on tenor and alto, it's tight. So I keep the horn where it needs to be. But on soprano, I only have the neck strap. Sorry, I only have the neck strap there so that I don't have to hold the instrument when I'm not playing it.
Gotcha.
My chair keeps slipping, so I start looking a little shorter than I actually
am. A little shorter. Well, and that was kind of where I wanted to go next, was kind of, it's interesting in the trumpet world, at least. I don't know if it's like this in the saxophone world or in woodwinds, but usually when injuries start manifesting themselves or bad habits, usually the rhetoric is to go to the person first and the technique first, which I think is 9 chances out of 10, at least for trumpet players, usually the issue. But then there is that concept of the equipment, right, that you were talking about, that was just causing you to overcompensate with things. And so what would be your advice for educators and for, just any musician, any woodwind player, as they are starting musicians out, or from an equipment standpoint and injury prevention standpoint, what would be your advice for educators in that respect of equipment and just setting up musicians for success rather than injury?
Yeah, well, I think it's challenging in the respect that if you have a band program, you're dealing with a lot of instruments, you're dealing with a lot of mouthpieces, reeds, brass mouthpieces, different sized faces. I mean, you're kind of looking for the middle of the bell curve, from the bell curve is this way, I guess, but kind of the middle of it there. So it's challenging. And when somebody is having a real issue, hopefully, a director is able to play an instrument well enough that's not their main instrument, that they can at least get a sound out of it. And, for brass instruments, maybe they have a couple other mouthpieces to try from that the student might go, oh God, this is so much easier. Might be the cup size, might be the depth, might be any number of different things for a brass instrument. For a saxophonist or a clarinetist, less so flute, because flute is just, it's just a solid piece of metal. Reed size will make a difference. Reed placement will make a difference. If the instrument is leaking it's very difficult to make a sound. So people start compensating. I mean, it's a real challenge. So, looking at equipment is important, but also teaching. Excuse me. Sorry, just getting over a cold. I still get a little bit of a cough. Teaching students the art of the fundamentals, I think, is really important, because if you're teaching people how to breathe correctly, in particular, decent posture, it doesn't have to be perfect, but decent. Sound production, the consistency of sound production is much more manageable if people understand where to breathe from. So some of the exercises that I do with students that will transform a band literally instantaneously. It's not like 6 weeks down the road or anything like that, but we do these breathing exercises. And one of the reasons that I learned this is that when I was in high school, I went to school in New Hampshire for high school, and there was a lot of snow. It was cold. Woodwinds sound awful in that weather. And so our instructor, this guy named Doug Patch, moved all the woodwinds to brass. And so I played sousaphone for 3 years in high school in marching band.
Oh, wow.
And one of the ways that one of the guys taught me wind production is we took a sheet of paper and we put it up against a wall, and I had to keep it there with my breath from real close, right? To really understand the nature of the breath, the support of the breath that the sousaphone needed. And so I kind of incorporate that idea in that I'll have students put their hand about 3 inches away from their mouth, and I'll have them pretend like it's a birthday cake and they're trying to blow out all the candles in one breath without puffing the cheeks. And so you can hear the wind here. Right? And so I'm not puffing. So we'll do that a few times. And then I'll say, okay, now put your hand on the spot of your body when you do it this time where you feel the pressure. And try it with me. And it should be here between the ribs. Mm-hmm. Do you feel it there? Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so then what I'll do is I'll say, I want you to pretend like you're yelling at somebody across the room to get their attention. Hey, hey, hey. Right? I said, put your hand in that same place. Hey, hey. Try it a couple of times.
Hey, hey, hey.
Even a little bit more forceful because they're on the other side of the room.
Hey, hey, hey.
Right? And so do you feel that twitch of the muscles? Right?
Yep.
And so I tell them, I said, that's where you have to engage. Right? Playing an instrument is the whole body. A lot of times we think of playing instruments using the tip of the tongue, tip of the lips, tip of the reed, tip of the sticks, tip of the mallets. It's tip, 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 right? Rather than understanding that it's a whole body experience. Just like listening, it's a whole body experience. So to engage the body in sound production, in my opinion, is essential to having a good sound, to having a good supported sound. And this is something that I think that band directors should be working on with their students. Some are, some aren't, but I think it's essential. So if I'm in working with a big band, one of the things that I'll do is I'll give them a chord. So say a B-flat-7 concert chord. So I'll give them their notes, and I say, you can pick any of these notes you want. And I said, I'm going to give you a placement within 4 bars. It might be the end of 3. 1, 2, 3, bop, right? And I want you to accent and play that part of the beat, that accent of the beat, engaging your body here. And so I'll just have the rhythm section groove, and I'll kind of throw this at them. And we do this exercise where they're basically saying, hey, with their sound, right? And I get them doing it soft. I get them doing it loud. Get them doing it in different parts of the beat also. And this is a really great warm-up because this basically forces them to engage their body to play these accents, right? And so once they start playing the tune, if they're engaging from there, it changes everything about the sound. And I've thought about this for years. I remember I saw, I think it was on PBS many, many years ago, it was Wynton Marsalis, and I believe it was Kathleen Battle. They were doing something, I think it was Carnegie Hall, big concert. They both had their teachers there. During the break, they go to their respective dressing rooms, and the very first thing that both their teachers said, very first thing, you're not supporting your sound. You're not breathing right. And I was like, whoa, that is super heavy.
Yeah.
Because you've got two of the greatest musicians on the planet,
At the
and their
greatest venue.
teachers are telling them, you're not supporting your sound. You're not getting full resonance because you're not supporting your sound. So that's how important breath is. And once students understand that, it can be worked on. It can be taught very easily. And again, it will change, excuse me, it'll change the way the instrument sounds immediately. And people will ask me sometimes, I'll be working with a band. They'll be like, man, how did you do that? And I said, I didn't do anything. They did it all. I said, I just gave them the tools to do it.
Absolutely.
And I tell the band that also. I say, you got to remember that I didn't do this for you. You guys did this. The reason you sound so good right now is because you're thinking about the support. You're thinking about engaging the body. Everything else will fall into place once you understand that. And you have to listen. I think that those two things, listening is the most important thing, right? And if you're listening, you'll understand that you're not supporting.
Right.
So if you can get those two things together, everything else falls into place, man. It changes articulation, changes intonation, changes the dynamics of the band, what I call emotional dynamics, because I think of dynamics as just being emotion. And not loud and soft, but it is loud and soft. It's a difference in volume, but I think of it as the emotional component of music. And but it changes all those things really instantaneously. And it's not much work to do it. You just have to engage. And a lot of times once they do that, you get done with the tune, and I'm like, who feels a little bit warm? And they all do. Why? Because they've been engaging their body. It's like you've been walking a little faster than you normally walk. And like, you're kind of like, okay, I'm going to work my body a little bit here. And that has to be the habit, in my opinion.
Cool. Well, thanks for going into all of that. I think it'll be really useful for everyone who listens to it. I mean, principles of breathing are fairly universal, for all wind musicians. There's some differences here and there, but the principles in that are just so critically important for injury prevention. So thank you for going into that.
Absolutely.
And as we're kind of going towards the end of our time, I have a couple of questions that I always love asking my guests, because they it goes kind of deep for them. But so let's say you go back to Jeff back in the day, and you have the opportunity to
Jeff with hair. That's what you're really wanting to
sure,
say, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I was just gonna say Jeff, but your words, not mine. But you have the opportunity to prevent that injury from happening, or to leave it there. Basically, has this whole process, that whole experience, been worth it to just kind of leave that there for you, or would you go back and change something?
It's hard to say. It's hard for me to think hypothetically. I certainly learned a lot from it, but there was a lot of frustration with it. I would much prefer that it hadn't happened, quite honestly. You know, yeah, it was a drag. I learned a lot from it, and excuse me. I think when you deal with adversity, how you deal with it and how you come out of it informs and influences what's next. So
absolutely.
So I'm grateful for the experience. I'm grateful for, Mike reaching out and helping me. Eternally grateful. I was also proactive in my search for an answer. And because I knew that what was happening was progressing. And so I think it's really important to listen to your body also, and to listen to what your body is telling you. So if pain exists for a reason.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And if you're not listening to it, it will intensify until you do. So my suggestion is listen to it. Don't be scared of it, or be scared of it, but don't be scared to
inaction.
Right. Don't be inactive on it. Yeah. And advocate for yourself. Ask a lot of questions. If you're dealing with a throat issue, go to the top person. I had trigger finger recently, right in my pinky in my right hand. And so I talked to a doctor friend of mine at Vanderbilt. I said, who should I go to? So he recommended this particular doctor. Set it up, went to him, and I said, yep, it's definitely trigger finger. Come back in 2 weeks. Let's see how it is. Might have to give you a steroid shot. That will probably take care of it. If it comes back, we'll probably have to do a very simple operation. Okay. A few days later, I'm at a gathering for Vanderbilt, where I teach, and Edgar Meyer is there, the bassist, who also teaches at Vanderbilt. I've known Edgar for 25 years. And I said, hey, man, I said, I'm dealing with this trigger finger thing. I said, you ever had it? And he goes like this. Operations on all 10 fingers for trigger finger.
Holy cow.
And I was like, what? And it so happens that it's the same doc that I went to see.
Wow.
Because he's the head guy.
Yeah.
And no pun intended, but I'm in good hands.
There you go.
So if it comes back, the guy that I want to go see is the guy that did 10 operations on the greatest bass player in the world.
Totally.
So I think you got to do your research. Find doctors that are reputable, because not all of them are great, quite honestly. And find people that you're comfortable with. Find people who will answer your questions to the best of their ability. Sometimes the answer is, I don't know, and that's frustrating. Get a second opinion. Advocate for your own health. It's very, very, very important.
Yeah, totally. And that was actually going to be my last question, was what advice would you give to someone who's in the trenches right now of injury, and then that's all $1 million advice right there.
Yeah. Again, advocate for yourself. Try to think about, what it is that might be causing it. It may be any number of different factors. And there's things like Feldenkrais and Alexander technique that people can study if it's a posture thing. There's a guitar player who's a student of mine at Vanderbilt whose posture is absolutely awful. He's all kind of, because the way he plays, he's kind of twisting around. And I took a picture of him the other day that I need to send it to him. And I'm going to be like, look, this is how your body is going to look if you stay in this position much longer. Excuse me. Right now, because he's young, it's okay. But 10 years, 10 years down the road, he's going to be going, oh man, I got, my back's kind of tweaked. Yeah, you think?
Right.
So recognizing these things and talking to students about them too is important. I mean, I am not a doctor, but I can see potential issues occurring with certain players. One of my alto players puffs his right cheek when he plays. And I'm trying to get him not to do that, but it may be too late. Those muscles may already be, like Dizzy couldn't not do that. Those muscles were blown out. That's why Dizzy's sound wasn't great at the end.
Right.
And it affects, there was always a delay. Bam, then it would happen.
Right.
And so there are things that we can see that we can go, oh, that's not a good position. That can affect things. It can affect the sound. Even the tilting of the head affects the way that people sound. There are so many small things that a lot of people don't think about. So I think evaluating, videoing yourself when you play, even if it's just a practice session, better on a gig because you're a little bit out of consciousness, and see what you're doing. If you're like standing on one foot, crossing your legs, playing down like this, these are things that affect the sound, that affect the body, that affect the back. My wife's specialty is the spine. She came out of sports medicine, has her master's in sports medicine, and then she got into holistic therapy, which is basically like utilizing the body to heal itself, right? So her specialty is the spine. I used to have all sorts of issues. Now I don't have any, because of her. And she does these classes that are back care classes, and I can send you the info if you're interested.
That'd be great.
But most things come from the spine. Most issues, carpal tunnel, tendonitis, all this stuff, sciatica, is all coming from the spine. I'm going to put our info in the chat here.
Oh, beautiful.
That's her website. And so, for example, a friend of mine here in town, a pianist, was dealing with sciatica, and he was about to go under the knife right when my wife was moving into Nashville. And I told him, I said, at least have a conversation with her. If nothing else, just have a talk. Within 2 sessions, all the feeling was back in his feet. Never went under the knife.
That's so crazy.
He was scheduled like that. He was scheduled that week for surgery, back surgery.
Which would have taken a ton of time to recover from.
Absolutely, if you even recover. I mean, back surgery is awful. If you even recover from it,
Yeah, and that's something I'm really, really passionate. I've had a few people on here who have, through their injury, become like one-on-one coaches through like holistic development, movement, and all that stuff. Sure. And it's been the coolest thing to talk to those guys because, as I have, I'm in a year and a half into my injury recovery, and I've just noticed as I've gone through it, the more I focus on like the other aspects of my health, right? That, it's just, I'm bringing more of myself to the instrument as I'm coming back to it. And then I'm a healthier person, mentally, physically, musically even. And it just, that holistic health, I think, is really important, especially for us who are in the collegiate phases of our training and our careers, right. For us to get down and to internalize. So
yeah, and you bring a good point also, man. It's not always just physical things that ail us, because the emotional and mental things that we deal with also manifest themselves physically. And so stress will manifest itself. I mean, any number of different things. So the idea of a holistic approach to this is really intriguing to me, including meditation, stretching, all these different things, getting exercise. I'm trying to get a standing desk so I don't have to sit at this chair that keeps going down and down and down. Because I'm out here all the time. and I think standing would be way better for me. And so, thinking about what little things can you do during the day that can help your health, I think they're really valid. I think that we have to, only we can make those changes. Somebody can tell us to do this, that, or the other thing, but it's got to be us that makes those changes, and they're profoundly important.
And that's the thing that, if I could just ask you one more question, is as you've worked with students, I've talked to, my friends, other musicians about, my own experience with coming back, and just without becoming like, how do you strike that balance of like helping people understand these things? Because I feel like these are things that really become profound to you, to use your word, when you go through them, when you experience them. But from a preventative measure, how you help your students realize, no, this is without becoming like without doing like any fear mongering, but like still helping them realize that, what their holistic health is far more paramount to their,
Well, I talk to them a lot about that, actually. My concern with my students, first and foremost, is for them as people, for their mental health, for their physical well-being. And so when they come into class, or if I've got a small group or whatever, I'm always checking in with them. How are you guys doing? How's the semester going? And, I've been doing this long enough. I've, done well over 325 clinics, and I've been at Vanderbilt now for 9.5 years. I've been around students enough that I can read them pretty quickly. Body language, eyes, the physicality of it, the whole thing. So I'm always checking in with them, and I'm always stressing the importance of taking care of themselves. And not just physically, but mentally also, because that's a big part of the game. And so we talk about it. We talk about, getting enough sleep, taking time for themselves. And I'm like, look, at the end of the day, it's just music. You're in process, and you're going to be in process the rest of your life. And I said, I'm here. I've been doing this forever. I said, I've seen it all. So if there's something and you want to come and talk to me, I says, I'm here for you. And I said, your well-being is of my utmost concern. The musical stuff, we'll get to that. I can make you a better musician. That's easy. But you've got to be healthy to be able to do that.
Right. It's the, I've just realized that, in different stages of my recovery, as I've focused on the rest of my life, improving the rest of my life, my musicianship actually improves. It's like that outside investment, which, it sounds so simple on paper, but some of these things you just got to experience,
Yeah, of course, man. I mean, experience is the greatest teacher. There's no question. There's no question. And, there is a lot of sacrifice along the way to doing this. But if you sacrifice your health, you got nothing. Mm-hmm. And I've certainly dealt with my share of health issues, and I push myself really hard, and that's one of the reasons. So I'm trying, as difficult as it is for me, I'm trying to say no to certain things. I've had long talks with Vic Wooten about this also, and and other musicians as well that deal with physical manifestations of things that likely have to do with us saying yes too many times and taking too much on, stressing out the body.
Well,
so it's challenging, it's challenging. But there's, as you said before, there's a community of us that are dealing with these things. And I think we're all pretty open to talking about them, and our experiences with them.
Yeah.
So, but advocate for yourself.
Definitely. That's I think the slogan for today's episode. So thank you so much for mentioning that, and thank you so much for your time and being willing to do this. I think it's just going to help so many people. This is kind of it's not as much talked about, so I'm really excited to have people to listen in and learn from you. And I just want to acknowledge you for everything you're doing and for being willing to do this. So thank you so much for that.
My pleasure, man. Thank you for asking, and thank you for doing it too. Like you said, it's something that doesn't get talked about enough, and a lot of people are dealing with it. So good on you, man. Full support, brother.
I appreciate it. And to the rest of you guys out there in podcast land, just thank you so much for joining us for today's episode. And until next time, keep trusting the process. Bye.
Peace.
Thanks for listening today. I hope you got as much out of it as I did. To see a full bio for our guest today, see the show notes, or go to our website at trusttheprocesspodcast.com. Make sure you share this with a musician you care about who is going through injury, a music educator in your life, or anyone just trying to make it in life. If you have a suggestion for a guest or topic to cover, shoot me an email at trustprocesspodcast@gmail.com or send me a message on Facebook or Instagram. Before we go, I just want to give a heartfelt thank you and shout out to my team. Daniel Baldwin, who is my audio engineer, Kevin West, who does all music and sound effects for the show, Peyton Womack, our website developer, and my sister, Dana Lovell, who created the logo and promotional materials. We wouldn't have the show without them. So tune in next time for another episode of Trust the Process.